Welcome, everyone. Okay, you have the agenda before you. Do I have a motion to approve it as written, or are there any additions or corrections?
Motion to approve.
Also have a second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Okay, the motion carries. So any public comments? All right, hearing none, we'll move on. So the minutes from our last meeting of November, any corrections or additions or comments about those minutes? Do I have a motion to approve? Okay, second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? The motion carries. Treasurer's report and check register. Do we have a report or questions?
We're lucky enough to have Charles here, so.
Got questions, I'll try to answer.
Just remind me that the New York State grants and aid is up just because we underestimated what we were going to get?
We also have in there the baby grant.
Oh, okay. Wouldn't it be good if that was separated out?
It is a New York State grant, Alyssa, like it rolls up into that.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Such
we
a
didn't
different
really
thing.
create,
Okay.
we know what it is.
All right.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the check register?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? The motion carries. Committee reports, finance.
We met on December 1st, and there were about 4 things that we really discussed. The first was we looked at the treasurer's report and the budget modifications, and we talked about where things need to be modified. Very exciting news that the fund balance did not have to be used for this year.
Yay,
And
good
that
work.
we have a good amount of money projected in excess in our budget. And that's basically due to the weather and some climate controls, the retirement costs with the stock market, repairs we were able to build to DASNY, and the Fahey grant. One thing that what needs to be changed is office and library supplies, and that's because the copying got put in there and we changed copiers and we had paper costs and copying costs. Next thing we talked about was the auditors. We changed auditors, if everyone remembers, and so they are hoping to come see and meet with the board in
Okay.
January.
What are their names?
Marvin and Co.
I'm sorry?
Marvin
and Co.
The third thing we talked about was the bonds, and Scott, Mary, Stephanie, and anyone else who worked on it should be applauded for all their hard work. Thanks to our very high rating from Moody's, we should save about $200,000 a year with our refinancing. So the one thing that Mary wanted to look at how is this going to affect our 2018 budget. And a press release was sent out. So at that point, it was going to be sent out. And the last thing we looked at was a capital reserve fund policy. We do have some language in policy, but we're looking at trying to clean it up a little bit and make it a little stronger. Are there any questions?
Do we know how much we put into that capital reserve, or will you make a recommendation of that in the
But
budget?
what we're hoping is that when the facilities team meets, that you will recommend to us how much we should put in. So, I mean, we'll be able to tell you how much fund balance we have, but there'll be recommendations and a plan for how much we'll take out of it every year.
Are you able to make a recommendation to us
Oh,
about
yeah,
what
I mean, we
organizations
will,
do?
but I haven't discussed it with Scott, so I don't, but we'll be happy to.
Mary and I will be playing rock, paper, scissors for a good hour over this.
Meeny, meeny.
I guess.
Yes, Karen?
So is it just a policy that the board has to adopt, or is there anything else that needs to be done to set this up?
Well, we're probably gonna enhance the policy, and then we want to work with the facilities committee, so the facilities committee will make a plan, and then they'll say, we suggest that in 2017 you do this, in 2018 you do that.
Yeah, so the
And then with dollar amounts.
Yeah, the policy isn't before us this
Right.
evening.
No, it's.
Right, I was just curious if
Yeah.
there was anything more to it than.
Yeah.
what-
Andy?
I think we discussed some phased purchasing as years go out, then that will inform the 5-year plan, when maybe some major chunks of the capital reserve would be used. So it would hopefully enhance planning
But it
as
also,
years go out.
but this also helps us put more in reserve. That's, am I understanding that correctly?
It just
Well,
moves it,
designates
it moves it from
stuff.
the general fund balance to the capital fund.
Okay.
Especially if we know big things like roofs or
Yeah.
other stuff that needs to be fixed.
Right, so as our strategic plan moves along as well, all of those things should align. The strategic plan, the
Right.
budget plan, the capital plan, and so forth. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay, policy and governance.
Okay, we had, November meeting, and we looked at 2 items. One was a procedural policy with regard to Washington Avenue Bridge closing. And then the other dealt with the use of technology and equipment by staff. With regard to the Washington Avenue closing policy procedure, basically, the thing is that the branch, we're a public entity, and the idea, the concept is that we should be open the entire time we're posted to be so. And so, what we were looking at was what the staff had established in terms of the procedures for closing down. And what we wanted to do was to ensure, what we were looking to do is to ensure the staff safety and also in clarity and language. What they provided to us, what they presented to us, and you have in your packet, was pretty clear. And our recommendation was minor in that we added a phrase, public service staff, so that we could determine that certain administrators could be in the building without the numbers that are required to be there. Because the thing is that we don't want anybody to be there by themselves, right? There needs to be at least 2 people in the library for, but there are instances where maybe Scott or Melanie or, one of the other senior staff may need to be in the library at odd times working on a project. And so we changed the language to reflect that to happen. The other item was use of technology and equipment by staff. Thing is that the library provides access to technology and equipment that staff have to use in the course of the day. And there is policy that establishes specific rules for how, our business is to be conducted. And we looked at the policy, and again, in this instance, our recommendation for revision is very minor. And then if you look at, there are 7 rules. When we got to number 7, we just added the language personally owned. Everything else we're recommending be accepted as is presented.
The original statement said use of personal mobile devices, and we just wanted to clarify it was personally owned
Okay.
mobile devices.
Questions for Arlene about those 2 policies?
So in the closing, Washington closing procedure, it says administrative and facilities. Does that include our maintenance staff? Any of our cleaners or people, so they could be here alone?
No, well, we want
Yeah.
to.
There's occasions where our facilities don't, because we have the 2 closers, and they generally help our 2 buildings that are open for after hours. So one is assigned to one building, and the other is assigned to another building.
So they're in the building alone?
Yep.
Other questions, comments?
That's a
She's
question.
got her wheels are turning, I can see it.
Well, from an administrative for administrators, I understand you might need to be in the building. For facilities, doesn't that, what differentiates facility staff from regular library staff? I mean, are they especially trained to be in buildings by themselves, or?
Typically, they're in the building by themselves when they say at the end of a meeting. They show up to close the building up. As people are leaving, they're moving the tables back. They're grabbing garbage bags. They're doing all those things usually while the public is out of the building. So they're not alone. From what we understand, they're not alone for prolonged periods, and they're never alone when the building's open to the public.
So they're not here cleaning by themselves?
They can be in the morning, yes.
When the building's not open to the public.
Yeah. Someone will come in to do floors or come in to run through and do the garbages.
Allison, you had a
I
question?
just had a question of why Washington Avenue has a closing procedure and not every other library.
Good question.
This was when I came on, if you notice on the policy and procedures grid, it's a procedure, it's not a policy. And it was because there were issues at the time at Washington Avenue, so it was requested that we create a procedure for it, and then it's changed several times for the 3 years I've been on, primarily because we've changed service points. We eliminated the Elk Street desk, we've moved our reference collection down to the first floor, we've shifted where children's are, we have now a new programming room and stuff like that. So pretty much every time we do a major shift, we've adjusted the policies or the procedure accordingly.
What we've discussed now, maybe it is the time to write, particularly for one or two buildings. Now is the time to write closing procedures for every location.
Okay.
Okay, I did not hear, we do not have procedures for the other buildings?
No, and we should.
Okay.
Yes, Andy?
You suggested maybe one or two buildings. Can you tell us what you're thinking is?
It's multiple. Where we have the most difficulty is where there's multiple entrance exits. The Howe branch is one of those. Pine Hills can kind of be a little bit of a difficult branch to close. But Howe is the one I think of the most. Where this location, it's one door out. Howe has two locations. One's on the kind of that ground floor, and one is that front entrance.
Yeah, so essentially, you've sort of risk assessed the vulnerability branch by branch. Washington has been in place for a while, and now it's time to move on to the next tier of vulnerability.
Yes.
Other questions or comments about those two procedures? They're procedures. One's a policy, one's a procedure. So do we need to vote on them separately?
We don't vote on the
Procedures, right? Okay, so just the policy. Okay, so before we move on to the policy, any more questions or discussion about the procedure of Washington closing? Okay. So questions about the use of equipment and technology policy? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Brenda, second, and Andy, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Okay, the motion carries. And now we're policies and procedure grid review. How are we doing now?
We're doing good. When it came due, and I apologize, it's my fault, I missed that we had, I don't remember which one. The whistleblower and conflict of interest. That should have been reviewed this past
Okay.
month, so
Okay.
they will be up for we'll be reviewing in our next month.
Okay, okay.
Everything else is up to date.
The conflict of interest definitely should run through our office. There's been some changes there.
Okay.
Any questions for Melanie on the status of our policy review? Okay. Hearing none, executive director report.
So we had a very quick deadline of December 1st for board members who were on at this time last year, or may have heard. We did an MOA with the union to keep the health insurance that we had at the time. But that moved up the date of when we needed to have our health insurance done. And that date was December 1st. Since there were negotiations, there were some back and forths. We did not agree with the union, or did not come to an agreement with the union about the health care, so we've moved forward with the health care plan that we researched and thought was best. And that gave us the deadline of December 1st, which we were a little afraid within 2 weeks of getting everybody signed up for their health care, but we actually had 100% enrollment, and that includes retirees, one which was in Israel, and another which was in the Adirondacks with no means of communication, but we somehow got a hold of him and we got him enrolled as well. It's still been a little bumpy, but we're working it out, and HR is working kind of day and night to work the kinks out as we move forward. It's always good to remind this board that our organization was moved from a large group to a small group under the Affordable Care Act, and that has made things a little more expensive and a little bit more difficult. The print release stations have been decommissioned. This was a very popular service that we put in place that kind of added an extra step to public printing, and I'd be really surprised if no one heard about how unhappy the public were with these. The staff were laughing behind you. It was with the idea of wireless printing, but after a few months of having them in place, we decided to roll that back. We will have wireless printing. We're just going to use a different vendor for that, actually a less expensive, easier to use vendor, so that's coming soon. While working on that exercise, we realized that our markup for printing was a little too high. We'd actually heard this from the public that we were a little expensive, so we are moving our black and white copies down to 15 cents, which would be a 50% markup, and our color copies, when we start doing color and copies, to 20 cents, which is a little bit less of a 50% markup. We think this is fair to the public. The organization never really did the math to see how much it cost us to print, and I've heard it from the public a few times that we were charging it's only 5 cents less, but that we were charging a little bit too much for our printing. Arbor Hill West Hill has seen a huge increase in new Americans using the facility, to the point where the staff here reached out to USCRI and had some translations done to help some of these young people understand they couldn't use their siblings' cards and some of the basic rules of the library. Staff were really excited about it, and I was really happy with the way they embraced it, and really found some interesting ways to deal with the issues that they were facing, but be welcoming, and so welcoming that the kids continue to come back. Last time I was here, there was 3 families here. It was really nice to see. The Delaware branch, as you know, the former head of the Delaware branch is now our head of youth services. So we have hired Julio Pinto Martin as the branch librarian at Delaware. There are some smiles. She's former full-time staff. She went to part-time when she had her kids, her 2 children, and now she's back full-time, and it was perfect timing for us. And if you go to Delaware, Lisa did a fantastic job of getting that branch where it needed to be in terms of behavior and tone. And now I think Julia has done a really good job with I've already had the public say to me, they're feeling like it's a little bit more like a library. And although the kids are still a little loud, I think that particular branch is going to move in the right direction. NILA, we had 19 staff members attend, and several of them were presenters. We're always proud of that, and for us, the beginning of November is always our favorite time of year. Our weekly Minecraft program at Washington Avenue has really become very popular. Minecraft surprises me because it kind of goes in and out of vogue with kids, and it's back, and it's very popular. I know it's popular here as well. And we also had our youth services librarians from Washington Avenue and Pine Hills went to the Ontario Early Education Center, which is a division of ACAP, and they did actually some literacy instruction for parents, which I love, and this organization had done in the past, and I hope they start doing more of it. Arbor Hill again, so far this year, a 95% increase in program attendance. You can't beat that. I mean, you really can't. And also, their Wi-Fi's up, but what's surprising is at other branches we're seeing computer use kind of wane. At this particular location, and we think it's because of Minecraft, we've seen a big increase in computer use as well. And also, which I love seeing, which we saw at the end of the finance meeting, they have a yoga program that they've kind of taken over. Rec department did it as a partnership. From what I understand, rec department is no longer doing it, but we're taking that on because it's so popular here. We have the John Bach branch, again, circulation's up. It helps being open on a Sunday, but I don't walk out of that branch without a book because they do such a good job of book selection and book displays. And Albany College of Pharmacy and Albany Medical College, they serve 83 children, doing 41.5 hours of tutoring just in November. It's a program we wish we could find partners like this to do something in our other locations. That partnership's been with the library for as long as I can remember, and it's just grown, and it's really impressive. We have our sensory story times, which are story times for people who are on the spectrum at Pine Hills, and we're expanding it to weekly. It went from every other week, and now it will be weekly. Our Delaware branch, again, for this year, and this is probably what the numbers are going to look like for this year, 83% increase in program attendance and 23% increase in meeting room use. I'm worried about the circulation and door count numbers there, but I really think with the retooling of the staff, we're going to start to slowly see that increase. And one great program that's there that was started by our head of youth services is Girls Who Code, which is a great program. It's STEM programming. I got to sit in for a couple minutes while it was going on there. Great group of kids, and I know that the Lieutenant Governor's office is really interested in coming at some point to kind of meet the group and see what's going on there. At the Howe branch, I love this because it's music. The branch celebrated International Percussion Month by making drums out of balloons and recycled material. North Albany's circulation is up 10%. I know we don't get to go there often, and I know it's a small branch. My sons now love that branch, and the way they're doing the marketing here, and you actually see it copied a little bit here as well, I think it really is driving up the usage there. They use Windows to talk about what programming they're going to do. They do some interesting displays, and it's just that branch is, I always call it, it's the little branch that could, but it really is fantastic. Community outreach, we're working on services to seniors. We have created a senior action committee, and they're working on expanding our book delivery to homes in different neighborhoods.
Is that a staff committee?
That's a staff committee. But they're working with NORC, and they're looking for additional volunteers. It's the driving portion that we really need volunteers. We'll talk about the bond in a little bit. And again, incidents are down across the organization by 15%, and positive comments are up by 56% for the year. I think that's, in part, I want to give credit to the CECs. We have community engagement clerks here at Arbor Hill, at Howe, at Delaware, and at Washington Avenue, and I honestly, if we could, we would expand that program to all of the branches. If you go into the library during the day, you will see Sam. He's our CEC at the Washington Avenue branch. I can't picture life without Sam because he has such an even temper, and he has a great way of dealing with individuals who we know who are regular users, but maybe that day decide to drink a little early. New individuals who are kind of testing the rules. He just has, and that branch is not without its issues, but he does an incredible job of working with the staff and working with the public to just make it a more welcoming environment. So I want to go back and just touch on one thing. I did a little side kind of report, just named Castro, or headlined in Castro. Albany Cuba Solidarity, a group that has regularly reserved a room at Washington Avenue for as long as we can remember, decided to have a special program, which we did not know about. They just reserved a room celebrating the life of Fidel Castro. This hit our radar through social media. Stephanie's department was excellent. She alerted us to the issues and some of the comments that were being made. We kind of found our policies, we kind of did an audit of how they were promoting it, all of, how the room was reserved, and then some of the comments that were made. I can say that day we received about 5 or 6 phone calls, all of them polite conversations. Some of them, some of their facts were a little wishy-washy about the Constitution, and hopefully we educated them and helped them understand the First Amendment a little bit better. I had, one person who said, well, you guys are promoting this program. I said, we're not, it's not our program. And we had a handful of protesters, but they were relatively polite.
They were probably some of the most polite protesters I've ever encountered.
And, for us, Ann Ackerson, who's doing our strategic plan, came up with this term that we're in love with, which is democracy incubator. And this really kind of hit us that morning. We're like, oh my God, we are a democracy incubator. I don't agree with all the things that we present, and I was open with the public when we talked about it. I don't agree with some of the things that the groups come in and do. I might have a problem with yoga. All of those things. And it's, for libraries right now, we're in an interesting time where we're really going to have to step up to the plate about defending free speech. And I thought this was a good exercise, and I was really proud of the way my staff handled it.
The evening of the event, I stayed around, just to be on hand in case any questions were asked. And as I said, the protesters themselves were extremely polite and very understanding of what we needed of them. But the most interesting thing was I was just walking the floor for about an hour and a half, and to hear about 5 separate conversations about what our Constitution says and what do you believe about communism versus capitalism, and hearing the conversations that were happening in the library were just amazing. And it was so fun just to be there that night, even though I think some people were a little tense because they were concerned about what was being said. The conversations were happening, and that's what we were all about.
So that's it. Do you guys have any questions for me? Okay.
Well, thank you for a very comprehensive, in-depth report, and represents so many good things being done. How hard the staff is working. Thank you very much. Okay, we have 2 reports from Albany. We'll start with UHLS.
Just briefly, I provided a brief synopsis of what was presented to us at our November meeting, and I made a copy of the report that we got from Tim Virgo, Executive Director. I think it's important for us to just know how much that system, how much that organization is doing, and how ready they are to develop themselves, but also to provide opportunities for us to develop as well. And so there's like an update in terms of what happened with the construction grant and how they advocated for us when one of our member organizations who was slated to receive monies realized not through their own doing, but because of circumstances could not benefit from those monies, advocated with the state to allow us to be able to keep more of the money. And so $44,000 that could have been lost to us were distributed to other libraries within our system. We lost $14,000 that had to be returned, but due to the hard work and advocacy of the staff there for the Upper Hudson Library System, we were able to maintain that. The work that's being done to encourage the branches or the systems to prepare for disasters is something that's on the front burner, and something that they're pressing and providing resources for us to be on top of. The work that they've done in terms of with the Controller's Office, making sure that our systems have access to that information so that we could be prepared for audits. That's been done, that's being done. It was like a 3-part workshop that was conducted, and the members are all invited to participate in that as well. There are trainings that are available for trustees, and I've listed the dates in this. And so we're all invited to go. This is for new members and people who are around who may need to be refreshed. Can attend these, and all we need to do is to contact Heidi by phone, or we have an email address and just schedule. The other nice thing about them is that they're willing to come to us, so that if we have a need to have them to come in and we have members, they're willing to come here and do the training for trustees. So that is there. And also just knowing that if there are issues, they go out to the member branches or systems and do consulting services with staff and with trustee boards. So this just, I just wanted us to know that this is stuff that they do all the time. So we could value, we should value their work and participate whenever we can in their trainings. The other thing is, and I'm really excited about this group, is the Regents Advisory Council on Libraries. That's a fun bunch.
Who knew, right?
I know. They were quite something else. We had a meeting, and this is my second time, well, actually, this is my third time meeting with them. We do stuff over the phone, but had a meeting with them in New York City on Friday. And they are, we got into some pretty heavy conversation about what we need to do to advocate for ourselves as libraries, and how everybody values what we do, but somehow they can't get around to thinking that the good work costs money. And so we got into some, as we were looking at what was being discussed on the state and the national level about libraries and library support, and conversations about we need to go grassroots on some of this stuff in terms of stirring up the conversation, some actions for how libraries are funded. That was a big part of our conversation. I made copies for you of a synopsis of the 2020 plan for library services in New York. Every time I go, I get shocked by something that I learn. So, and this, by the number of schools and communities in our state that do not have libraries shocks my system. And yet libraries are discussed as being something that's important to the health of education in our state and in our country, and yet it's so under-supported. And it's almost like it's an afterthought, if anything, in terms of how we should be treated in terms of funding considerations. So you have a synopsis, there are links there to the State Education Department where you can go online and read more in greater detail what they're talking about in terms of strategies, vision for our state, and things that we need to do. They threw out at us, and I almost fainted, but then I said, well, I saw something similar here in Albany, that 77% of the schools in Harlem, my hometown, I wouldn't upset me this way, don't have libraries. The middle and senior high schools do not. So 27 of the 35 schools between 110th Street and 155th Street do not have libraries. I don't get that. I understand that. But then we had a situation right here in the city of Albany where we uncovered a school that didn't have library. And I went to Scott and we tried to put together a thing about, okay, how are we going to get these middle schoolers access to a library? It just boggles my mind. So anyway, I just wanted to share this. The other thing is I know that Scott and Tim probably won't let me go meet with these guys anymore without supervision.
You're dangerous, Arlene.
I think I got a little bit dangerous. No, but I always look at what we're doing, And so when you're talking about doing things to impress the regions and how we can impress legislators, I think about the things that we are already doing that we're working on. So the state library is putting together a maker fair. They're planning for the makerspace thing that y'all are doing. they want to do something to share that with the regions and to share that with legislators. It's very early in the planning process. So Bernie said that, I didn't know if we could be involved with that at all. It's just the beginning of the conversation. But I was thinking that perhaps you and Tim would like to be part of that conversation and see what we can do. And a big thing I just want to throw out, and then I'm going to shut it down, is that we're having conversations about how we can link the economic viability of our state and of our communities to libraries and include that as part of the conversation about why we need to consider us more deliberately when it comes to funding. We have to be able to show our impact. And so one of the things that they talk about in here is that one of the things we need to do is to look at our strategies for how we communicate with the public about and we do this already, but we need to add that economic development aspect to it. And I'm done.
Great reports, Emily.
Everybody get a copy of this?
And I think we're lucky to have you on the Regents group, and as you liaise with both of these groups, perhaps a role for us or specific actions can evolve from this conversation.
Well, that's what I'm looking, and that's why I thought I was going to get in trouble. I told Ray, I said, they're not going to let me come here by myself anymore.
Too late.
But there's more for us to talk about.
Comments or questions for Armin? Yes.
So the Regions Advisory Committee, is that made up of regions or people who are appointed by the regions?
No, there's 12 of us on, well, actually 13, just added a person. But it's 12 of us, and we are advisors to the Board of Regents to the State Education Department with regard to policies and practices for libraries. Yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Yes. It's a good connection.
And I told you, I want you all to make a presentation to the regents about what you all did.
At Pine Hills, the lien
On decision.
process, on the new registration process, and they just, of course, had a piece on the website and in the newsletter about rolling it out to all the branches December 1. So,
Yeah, I would really like for that to get presented.
okay, you've heard it here, boss. I'd be happy to do that. Thank you. Okay, unfinished business. We have the bond project. What else do we want to say about that?
I think Mary and Stephanie should be commended. It was a ridiculous amount of work. And I just think it's really important for this board to be proud of the rating that we received. It shows that we are a truly financially responsible organization. You honestly can't, you can beat that rating, but you have to be the federal government to beat that rating. And we were told, DASNY told me after I signed 1,000 documents, that this was one of the smoothest they've ever seen this process go. And that they were really impressed with the work that we did and the research we did. And, we used the full capacity of the organization. We had reference librarians doing the research for us about the city and reaching out. So it was very cool to kind of have frontline staff helping us, and they felt really excited about that investment, and it was good. And a lot of the work that we did, some of it was helpful, the work that we had done before it. And then also this is going to lend to probably a cleaner community report and better communication with local government and local members of the community about what we mean to the economy of our city.
Well done. Well done. Yes. One more time. Andy?
DASNY has it up on their website. Taxpayers win as Albany Public Library saves $4 million through DASNY.
Excellent. Okay. Budget modifications for the current year.
I thought at a higher level I would start with from Allison's Finance Committee report, just to tell you at a high level what was different about this year. The first one, it says weather and electricity costs were lower. So that saved us $109,000. But it's two things. Obviously, one is the weather, but the second thing is that earlier this year, before we closed out the bond, we had $169,000 left to spend with DASNY. And the first thing we did is Scott and I got in his office and talked to Dan, the head of maintenance, and the first monies that we spent were on new management controls on two buildings which we did not have, and one was Arbor Hill, the other was Bach. Those were put in early this year, and that really helped us save money on the heat and light, so that was a big thing. The second thing is the New York State retirement cost. That obviously it's a function of the fiscal markets doing better. So we always forecast that money based on what the prior year's rate was. But given that it's going lower, when we project going forward, we'll go at the lower rate. But that saved us $115,000. The thing we talked about before was the Fahey grant, which we did the majority of work for it in fiscal 2016, so we were able to take that revenue this year. And the last thing, like I talked about, was the DASNY monies of $169,000 that you're not going to see on a revenue line. You're going to see lower costs on cost lines, because what we do is we spent the money, billed the money to DASNY. DASNY gave us a two-party check back so that we signed off on the check and gave it to our vendor, so that we did not have to pay the bill. Really, it came out of the bond money. So that, again, that bill back all happened all the way up till October, right before we refinanced the bond. So those are the major reasons why we're doing so well this year. And then if you come to the sheet that has a lot of numbers on it, I won't bore you with every number, called 2016 budget modifications. Just to remind you, if there's a usage, that would mean that cost would be higher than the budget, or that a revenue category would be lower than the budget. And a source of funds would be if a revenue line was higher than the budget and costs were lower than the budget. But in the bottom line in the budget modification, what we do is we reforecast the year, we put in this estimate, and so by us finding sources, when we use money, we take money out of one pocket of the budget and we put it into another. So that new estimate column would then be the budget modified budget, which we will look to approve this evening. So I can go through the categories. Do you want me to go through all the categories with you? I gave you the major ones, but really, if you look at the prior page, what you can see is that the annual budget, where it says Treasurer's Report, October 31, 2016, we had, the original budget said we were going to need $9.2 million worth of revenue to support our expenses, and that we would have used $400,000 out of the fund balance. But with the estimate column, that this is what we're proposing, we will use $9 million, but we won't be using any fund balance, and the majority of reasons why we won't are we get sources, for instance, from all those various revenue categories on the top. I won't list them all, but you can just see the majority of revenue is coming in higher than the original budget, and a lot of the costs are coming in lower than budget, so those are sources for us. And the only category in terms of expense that we really came in higher this year was in office and library supplies. Some of that had to do with paper and toner, other it had to do with higher usage for our libraries. So the good news is we will not be using fund balance We forecast that we are probably gonna make around $260,000 in income this year. You know, 169 of that has to do with DASNY billbacks. The rest of it is really either lower costs or higher revenues.
It's always good to understand that one of the reasons why we need to do budget mods is because we create a budget so far in advance. So we will be next month working on the 2018 budget. So whereas most organizations kind of work on their budget in November before the coming year, we're doing it 12, 13 months in advance, really. So it makes it really difficult to be as accurate as we'd like to be. One of my goals for this year, and Mary and I have talked about it, is using our 5-year projection and tightening it by looking at its past performance and giving us a better idea of where the budget's at. You know, this is an organization that is, I like to remind people, this is an organization that's only, when did we open these buildings? 7 years ago. In reality, this is an organization that's really only, the way it operates is only 7 years old. So this is one thing where I have a goal to tighten the way we do our budget, but it's difficult. It's like doing your household budget for 2018. You have no idea where you're going to live or what.
And there's some things you can't control for, weather and stock market and those
Yeah.
kinds of things. But this is a healthy picture, so we're not going to compare.
Very healthy.
Questions, comments for Mary before we make a motion? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the modifications? Karen? Second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Thank you. Strategic plan update.
We're still working with Ann to kind of, we're having staff right now, what we identify as our services team, which is our L3s, our head of outreach, and our public information officer, looking at her findings to kind of refine some things. So we hope to have it ready for you in the January.
Okay, so results from the quarterly evaluation. So did the evaluation at the last meeting and you have the results before you. Pretty consistent themes with what we've been seeing over several evaluations. Somebody did like the apples, so whoever brought those last time. There's a thank you there. Just the season right there. Yeah. Any comments about this evaluation? Any questions? Okay, so we'll continue to do this quarterly and see how we're doing with our meetings. New business, CDTA.
So CDTA will begin, we're hoping to begin work in the front of Washington Avenue. They're hoping February or March if the weather allows. As with any construction that's done in the front of a building, they will need easement so that some of their equipment can be stored or can travel across some of our property. So they've come to us and asked us for a temporary easement just so they have the right to kind of drop cement when they need to drop cement or park an excavator or use an excavator because some of the work is actually for us. It's just allowing them legally, and they will need insurance to be able to have their equipment and their workmen on that area. And it will take up the front of the building. So Washington Avenue this spring will probably, for a little while, look like a construction zone.
We won't block the front entrance, right?
They are telling us that the front entrance will not be blocked, but Dan and I have a plan B because we know with construction you always need a plan B. We've been working on a side entrance that's kind of in the alleyway that we share with the Armory. There's a door there. We've put our key card access there because we also want to make it so that individuals who take the bus or ride their bike to work, which we have a lot of, don't have to walk around to the back of the building to key card in, nor do they need to physically shove the glass door to the side, which has caused some costly repairs. So they'll be able to walk down that area. Probably in the morning, they'll be concerned about it in the evening. We're getting better lighting for there. But that idea kind of came about because that might be our entrance for a little bit in case the work does impede.
So it sounds like you've touched on this, so when construction's underway at the libraries, I assume we're required to have some interim safety measures?
Yes.
Okay.
So we will work with CDTA and our facilities group. We have a lot of experience in construction, so
Yes.
we're lucky. We're lucky.
Question.
Allison, we'll start.
Accessibility, if the front is blocked.
It'll be accessible. That doorway is actually accessible. We'll probably have to build a little ramp to come up into the door, but it's not very high. So you'll be able to go through.
Listen? Oh, I thought you.
And we know that there will be security issues, so we're also, we're already putting a camera there to begin with. We might put temporary gates. We're trying to look at a couple different ways that would, probably the biggest concern is that would make some of the collection, particularly the 900s, susceptible to theft. So we do need to weed some of our Abraham Lincoln books, not our art books, and some of our Revolutionary War books, Chris. But we don't want them to be weeded that way.
So, is this for our action or is it?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Our legal counsel has drafted a resolution that's in the additions to the packet. And to review that, we can take a vote.
We don't have the agreement yet, but if you take a look at the two maps, the heavy black line is the borders by meets and bounds of the area that you're going to be temporarily conveying. And Scott, as I understand it, the consideration for the conveyance is to repair a lot of that area, give you new sidewalk,
Yes.
new curbing in areas, new landscape beds, things like that. So you'll get it back in better condition than it is being lent to them. If you look on the second map, the red line delineates that temporary easement and it shows you the, what it will look like afterwards versus what it looks like currently. So what the resolution does is it basically authorizes Scott with my input and approval to execute a temporary easement agreement that will give them this described space. It's actually this described space for a period of up to 2 years. It won't take that long.
questions about the resolution? If not, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion
Okay.
to authorize the agreement granting the temporary easement for CDTA.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. Any discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? And the motion carries. Scott, did you want to mention the new schedule at all? So this was part of the handout, but not on the agenda.
No, I'm not sure why this ended up in, Stephanie, did we just put this in as an information item?
Okay.
And, I do want to mention, I do not think Election Day falls on November 14th.
Oh, that's late.
So, but the next time we look at this schedule, we had a member of the public who was very upset that we had a board meeting on Election Day. So we should definitely, when we look at these schedules, when that happens, I would hope that the board has a discussion about maybe moving the meeting that day. I thought he made
The
a.
member of the public had difficulty getting here because they
No,
were-
and it wasn't a member of the public. They did not indicate they were coming to the meeting. They just were upset that we would have a meeting on the same day as Election Day. And we'll talk about it when we.
You mean if we didn't, Hillary would have won?
I don't know, but I think it's worthwhile to have that discussion the next time.
There used to be a trustee that was adamant about this every year. And we raised it every year to make sure we didn't do it, so it's just fun to hear it come back.
It's not that trustee.
I won't throw him under the bus anyway.
Don't think you need to.
Okay, any public comment? Yes.
My name's Megan Wakeman. I'm a staff member at the library and I'm part of the union. The union respectfully, takes exception to the director's executive summary for this meeting. that the union did not halt negotiations. That the last time we met on November 9th, we said that we would use the date scheduled at November 30th to meet internally, which we did, and we contacted management on December 2nd looking for more dates to meet for the month of December. So from our perspective, we did not halt negotiations.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then we will go into executive session for the matter of the executive director's performance appraisal. So we are adjourned into executive session.